Welcome back to Cowboys Not Eggheads. Today, I'm very, very pleased and honored to have Andy Campbell on Cowboys Not Eggheads, and I'm just going to read his bio because it's a heck of a 2 paragraphs. So here we go. Andy Campbell is a resilience survivor and inspirational author who has overcome numerous life-altering challenges. A victim of childhood sexual abuse and bullying, the loss of his mother at an early age, and the eventual estrangement from his father, the current battle with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and the loss of his youngest son to suicide. Despite enduring multiple surgeries, grueling chemotherapy treatments, and the tragic loss of his youngest child, Andy has demonstrated remarkable strength and perseverance. Through his experiences, he has developed a unique perspective on resilience and the power of his 15 core beliefs. Andy lives with his wife and remains actively engaged in the lives of his 3 remaining adult children as he continues to support his family while managing his own health challenges. His book, Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks, shares the principles that have helped him navigate life's darkest moments, offering hope and guidance to others facing adversity undefined. What a bio. What a bio. When you first contacted me, you had me at hello, the famous line from Jerry Maguire.
Yeah. It's
This podcast, Andy, is about it's about resilience. It's about facing adversity. It's about overcoming fear. Fear is a bad word here. I don't like it. It was started out of the fear of the pandemic. And so I just think we're going to have a great conversation today. We got a lot to talk about. Tell me, what are your thoughts on fear? You're a guy that obviously has probably been in some positions where fear might have come into place. Tell me your thoughts on fear.
Yeah. So first, Sam, thank you so much for giving me the time to spend with you and having the conversation. I very much appreciate your focus on words because I think words matter. Individual words matter.
Yes.
And I don't want to jump ahead, but one of my core beliefs is always try. Never try, always work. I don't like the word try. Try to me kind of implies that there is, I don't know, it gives the word try to me kind of leaves the door open for, well, I just didn't feel like it. I might not be able to do it. The work feels like you put your shoulder to the grindstone. So I work really hard and diligently not to use the word try. So I appreciate your focus on fear being a word that, should really be, I prefer to think of fear as something that you have to move through, not something that is. And so I think we all as humans, we were designed to have a sensory perception that I think we call fear that would say, I'm about to be eaten by a bear. I'm about to be, like somebody's coming at me.
That's right.
Fear, yeah, right. So, we sense those things. And I think what we call that is fear because it's like, well, I don't want to die from this bear attack, so I should probably do something. But I do think that remaining in a place of fear or allowing fear to guide your decisions is a less than optimal state. And one should work diligently to reduce fear's impact. I think that is the definition of courage and it's not like I created this, but it's doing things in spite of the fear. And so fear exists. And I readily admit that I lived most of my life in where fear was a constant companion.
My friend,
and I didn't realize it.
You were a victim of sexual assault as a child.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I believe the first time I was 6, I was groomed, and then by someone in the neighborhood. My parents came from a very poor background, row crop farmers in South Alabama, and they made a determination that they would not be poor. They had, they wanted to get out of that. And they did a great job for us and for future generations by doing that. Trade-off was that they both worked constantly, which left me alone and in some situations that one at that age is ill-prepared to understand or consent to. And, I've been molested. I was raped. I was violated. And I think you come out of those things in those years, and it leaves you. I'd always called it, I'm a very good risk manager. What I came to face later was I made a lot of decisions based on fear. And, one can say, well, yeah, you've had these things occur. And so it's reasonable to think that those could have an impact, especially in childhood when you're formulating your way to think and deal with the world. But eventually, one has to confront your challenges or the adversity, and that was an adversity. And I think having lived that way for so long, I still have to be conscious to not make decisions based in fear and to not let fear cause me to ruminate over problems. And so that's why when you bring up the word fear, I would say to your listeners, I am confident that even if fear is either pervasive or at the edges of your life, you can move through that and live life in spite of it and live a more courageous life.
So Andy, at what age how in the world did you overcome that? I mean, I don't think you ever will overcome it. Honestly, I just think that's an unbelievable event at a very, very young age. I mean, did you have therapy, or how did you learn to cope with being a victim, and we talk about victimhood on here as well. We talk about real victims and people that use victim as a crutch. You are a real victim, sir, but you are running from the victimhood mentality. I mean, it's unbelievable. But at what age were you when you kind of realized that, hey, I need to face some of these things, and how did you face them?
I was probably in my 40s before I ever dealt
Well,
with that, right?
that's a rough patch of carrying
I
that
didn't
around.
do, I didn't, yeah, I didn't really. I went after my son's passing, about a year. That's been early July, early June will be 4 years since his passing. So really just 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, my wife and my family and I began a therapy technique called EMDR, if you've heard of it or are familiar
I
with it.
sure have, and we've actually talked about it briefly on this podcast. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
so it does an amazing job. You have to kind of prepare yourself to go back and relive some of those things, but it definitely rewires how you are able. That's why I'm able to sit here and say the words. Is EMDR? I can sit here and talk. I couldn't utter the words really before that. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have spoken about them, and I still don't speak about them casually or flippantly. But I wouldn't have been able to really talk to you about it. So, but how I dealt with it, I think, was poorly.
Well,
And
for
then,
heaven's sakes, okay, I guess I'll accept that. I understand why you
yeah,
handled
I
it.
mean, look, how do you deal with it? Like a lot of things, I think, having a therapist or kind of confronting those things was not in my family's makeup. Similar things had happened to my father under completely different circumstances. It was more of a thing. It did not get spoken about. It happened. You put it behind you and you drive forward. So I think I would say, you know, uh, substances, alcohol, and promiscuity as I grew older. No, because I think once you open the door to that, and there's no consent to that. But once you open a child's mind to those things, it's a genie that's very difficult to put back in the bottle. And so I think to live with it, you start looking for ways to kind of cover it mentally, not cover it up, but just, you know, kind of push it down, not think about it. And when you do think about it, or if it's constantly there, but I didn't realize it was constantly there, right? So, like, for instance, when I did EMDR, I told the therapist I didn't want to do that. She
I'm sorry,
described what it would be
I'm
like.
sorry to interrupt, Andy. Will you tell our listeners what EMDR is so we can? It's like a radio show. People tune in, tune out. So not
Yeah,
everybody's.
yeah. So I would do my best to remember the abbreviation. It's eye movement desensitization something. I can't remember the R is either, but it's basically rapid eye movement. So what they try to do, they don't really know how it happens. They know what happens from it, what it does, which is kind of they believe it sends memories down a different neural pathway. It creates a different neural pathway that isn't associated with the actual event so that you don't have the physical and emotional responses to it that were trapped in that first neural pathway that was created when the event took place. So I told the therapist that I did not want to relive any of these things. First, I told her they're not bothering me. They're not bothering me. I'm good. I put them
You
behind me.
managed,
I've got
right? You were
got
managed.
it, And she told me how long it would take. Like you can tell from the bio when she was taking notes on things we would go through EMDR on. It's never a good sign. They got the legal pad and they flip the page and they go to the second page and they flip that page and they go, and so
Write an encyclopedia about you, sir.
yeah. And so she said, well, because when I was not too long, I mean, I had a lot of stuff that's not in the bio. I had a guy try to kill me one time, hit me in the face with a 2-inch galvanized pipe, crushed my face in. I was about 11 years old, 12 years old when that happened. I think I was 12 years old when that happened. When I was 11, yeah, I mean, that was part of it. And then after that, I think there was just a lot more bullying. I was a kind of a smaller kid then, and I really kind of grew up late teen years. I put on size and weight, and but back then I was pretty small, and not just small for at age, but I wasn't a very large in my age category. I was smaller than average, and I've been shot at, a lot of different things. So she's writing all these things down, and she goes, look, normally we do this for about 8 hours, 8 sessions, 1 hour session, but for you, it might, we might have to do 20 sessions. We'll just see. We might have to do, 15 or 20 sessions. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I don't want to relive these things. I've got them all tucked away. Everything's fine. It's not affecting me. And she said, we can spend less than the time that forms one day, less than 24 hours. That's one day of your life. We can spend that day rewiring how you think about these things and allowing you to get free from them so you can start changing the way you behave and react. Or you can continue living with them every moment of every day for the rest of your life. And for some reason, that struck a chord with me when she positioned it that way. And that seemed like a good trade-off at that point. One day, and I don't have to deal with this. Because the more she talked to me, the more I realized I had not really tucked it away. And I did not have a way to deal with it, or I had not dealt with it well.
Mm-mm.
And it was affecting a lot of decisions still, from long before, way in the past. And so when I did the EMDR, I realized just how that's as I went through that process, I realized how much it had influenced my life, these events, and how much they were still there, how much they still remained in my thought process, in my emotional responses, all of those things. So when you say, how did you get through it? I credit my ancestors for being a very determined, persistent people. They persevered. That's what they did. And I looked back at them and I thought, well, they didn't have toilet paper. Women didn't have sanitary pads or tampons. They didn't have air conditioning. They didn't have anything, and somehow they survived. And so it kind of felt a little weak to me to, complain about it. And I was never of the mindset that I remember to take my own life. I just kind of existed. I realized later in my life that I had existed, but I was not happy. I was just not a happy person. And so I would say that while I understand now what happened, again, I would say to your listeners, no matter what it is and no matter the rationale for it, and it is completely understandable. I've come to terms with things like no child can consent, right? Because you go through all these things in your mind. What part did I play? Could I have done something about it? Was I not strong enough why didn't I stop these things? So, you work through those things. What I would say to people is, number one on my list of core beliefs is no one outruns the universe. And there's a lot of different applications for that cliche.
I'm sorry, repeat that. Nope.
No one outruns the universe.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so for me in that moment, what it meant was you haven't dealt with this stuff. You're not actually handling it well. It's not actually, down. Eventually the universe kind of corners you and says, you should face this, face it head on, confront the pain and the memories and free yourself from it. Because I think that's really the only way you can begin to loosen the shackles and kind of free yourself from it is you have to turn and face the adversity, because it's not going to go away. You're not going to lessen it, and it's not just going to go away on its own. So I do like the way you said in the beginning about facing adversity, because I am a believer that we will face it one way or the other. So I prefer to face it at my time and choosing than someone else's.
So you currently actively right now have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, is that correct?
Yes. So now I should say I'm coming up on this August will be 7 years since diagnosis.
Wow.
I think the first
Wow.
prognosis the oncologist gave me was maybe 6 months or so, but I'm coming up on 7 years. And for about the last 4 years, maybe 5 years, there has been no visible sign of disease. I get scanned. I'm still in a cancer trial. I'm still on a cancer drug, what's called a PARP, a PARP, a PARP inhibitor. And I've been in that trial now for probably 5.5 years. I think October will be 6 years. And, the trial was a combination of drugs that had been used in. So I have a BRCA mutation, I have a BRCA1 mutation, and a
Genetic.
BRCA1 mutation. And
You have a family history. You folks in
yeah,
your family have battled breast cancer and all these genetic cancers, correct?
yeah. My mother, and so there were 5 sisters. My mother and 3 of them, so 4 of them, died from breast cancer. 3 of them died in their early 50s. My mother was one of them. She was diagnosed at 42. Struggled with it, the ups and downs of thinking it was in remission and then it would come back, and then thinking it was in remission and then it came back. But she died 11 years after she was originally diagnosed. So yeah, and it's one of the reasons why my physician said when I was diagnosed, not my oncologist, that was a different story, but my general physician was like, Andy, don't quit your job and don't go book that final vacation. I know this is what he said to me. I know the odds are, at that time, they've gotten better now, but at that time it was 3% to make it 5 years. No, 3% to make it 3 years, and like 5%, 1%, sorry, 3% to make it 3 years, 1% would make it 5 years. And he said, but always remember, Andy, the way statistics works is that's a whole population average. You have a 50-50 shot. Every individual is a 50-50 shot. So I think we've got a chance. And it turned out that we do have a chance. The reason I'm still considered stage 4.
Was it early detection? I mean, it's
No,
not early detection. Obviously, it's stage 4 right away. But did you
no,
know,
it was.
from a genetic standpoint, did you know your risk going because of your family history? Did you think about that and all those things? And the reason
I
I
had
ask
not.
is
Yeah,
I have a very dear friend of mine who's almost like a daughter to me, started a hereditary a foundation called the Cami K. Preston Nation Hereditary Foundation, and I actually wanted her on tonight to help interview you, but it's timing issues and so forth. But anyway, she would want. Here's what Brandy would say to you right now, or she would ask you. She would say, "Now, how many children do you have? You have 3 adult children right now, and do
yeah, all been tested.
they all know their risk? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah, oh
and
yeah,
so
oh
are
yeah,
they taking? They should be taking preventative measures. So if you have
yep,
daughters or sons, or what do you have?
yeah. I had 2 daughters and 2 sons. One son remains, one daughter. So I did not know the hereditary part of the equation at the time prior.
Right.
But I knew that everyone, on my mother's side of the family, my grandmother on my mother's side of the family, had all died from breast cancer. So I had it in my mind, and I don't know why. Maybe because my mother died at 53. I had this very strong suspicion that I would not live past 53. I would be diagnosed and I would die on or
An
during or
intuition.
before my 54th birthday.
And how old are you now?
I turned 60 in July.
All right. Let's go.
I will have completed 60 years in July. I had, from probably the age of, and at 42, the same thing happened to me that happened to my mother. All my hormones went crazy. I just got lethargic. I didn't feel well. I went to the doctor, and he's like, "Holy cow, we got to get your thyroid's gone crazy. Your testosterone has dropped like to like below 200. Like I think it was like 180 or something. It just went like in like 6 months. My whole hormone panel changed. Same thing happened actually to my mother. 42, her whole hormone panel changed, and then the battle with cancer started. So I was kind of primed for it. So every 6 months, I had PSA. I was convinced I was going to get prostate cancer, and if it wasn't prostate cancer, it'd
So
probably be
you
breast
were
cancer.
doing early detection things every 6
Oh
months.
yeah.
For how long?
Well, for
I mean, for years.
42 to 53, so 11 years.
Good for you. So, and sure enough, your 6 month lease on life comes up, and oh, by the way, we're at stage
They
4.
didn't find it that way. They didn't find it that way.
They didn't.
So no, because I was having,
I wouldn't shut up
I had
unless you
the PSA test. Yeah, well, I was looking in the wrong place. No, but at that time, there was only like 1 or 2% of people with the BRCA mutation went on to develop pancreatic cancer. They didn't have any real data on that. So, like the rough numbers was
for breast cancer is 87% chance of getting
yeah,
breast.
yeah, that's right, yeah, right.
And
So,
my friend
but
Randy had a double mastectomy at age 22 because of it. You know,
my oldest daughter, had a double mastectomy at 22.
Brandy's going to be
She
so
did
happy.
that too. But I was focused on the prostate, and I thought, well, maybe breast cancer, male breast cancer. I'd read that was a possibility, low percentages, but it was there. So every 6 months, I got a PSA test. I had a digital exam, and I had to do like a self-exam because I was convinced that I would. But then, so that goes on for 11 years. Nothing happens, and I readily admit that because I was dealing with other things that I thought were under control. I could party pretty hard. I could, I was able to hold my own in most situations.
Well, the great cancer feeder is alcohol.
Oh, it does. It is. It will. Yeah. So I've been having some abdominal pain, and my wife was like, "You need to go get checked." In my mind, I was going to die from cancer when I was 53. And so I didn't really want to go to the doctor. But we had a great physician. He had taken over the practice from another pair of great physicians that we'd had. So we knew them well. We knew him well. And she said, "No, you got to go see him." She talked me into it. I set an appointment. I went. He gave me some medicine to test some stuff while I was in the office. And he said, I think you have a gallbladder issue. I don't know if we need to remove it or if you've got gallstones, but I want to send you for an ultrasound. And so I went the next day and I got the ultrasound, and I could tell from the tech's face that something was not right. That afternoon, the doctor's office called me, and the nurse said, and I knew the nurse, she had been there for, I don't know, 30 years, 20 years, something like that, a long time. And she said, "Andy, I got some bad news. The ultrasound found lesions on your liver. So we want you to go get an MRI tomorrow." I said, "Okay." So I messaged my physician and I said, "Listen, I know this is bad. I got it. It's bad. But at least it's not pancreatic cancer." And so the next day I got the MRI and they came back and they said, "Well, actually, you got pancreatic cancer." And so then began, you get the PET scan. And the first good news that I got was it had gone to the distant organ, to the liver. It had gotten there probably through the bile duct, and it hadn't, I didn't have it in my lymph nodes. I didn't have it in my lungs. But the pancreas was pretty much covered in it. The GI surgeon, when he did the biopsy, came in afterwards and he said, "Andy, look, the ultrasound, the GI ultrasound and the biopsy, it's all over your pancreas. Like it's in a lot of places, and there's 3 big lesions on your liver, but it's you got a lot of cancer in your liver also." He said, "But the weirdest thing is, why'd you go to, your doctor, and how did you get here?" And I said, I don't understand what you're saying." He said, "Well, it's everywhere, but it's nowhere where you would know it. Your pancreas is still functioning. That's not the cause of your abdominal pain. you don't have a reason to have known about it. But had you not known about it, if it had gone on another 90 days, you'd probably be dead. And, within 6 months, you'd be dead. And I said, I don't know. And it turns out that I had like IBS. I'd just been drinking too much, and I was under a tremendous amount of stress at work. And, and later we can touch on my youngest son. My youngest son had told my wife and at the age of 9 that he had decided he was going to kill himself.
How is
And
that impossible?
he didn't. Yeah, you got to think. So that would have been 22 years ago, right? He died at 18. It's 24 years. So he had no internet connection. Didn't have a phone. He didn't know anyone who had taken their life. He didn't know anyone who knew anyone who had taken their own life.
He
And,
was
as
born.
we
He was
talked
born.
about it.
It just breaks my heart.
Yeah, it turns out he was a high IQ individual. And I later found out that a lot of people who you would not think are high IQs, but they have suicidal ideations, it turns out they are highly intelligent people, and they are kind of cursed with a certain logic, both an emotional side and a very logical side. And so to my son, when we had discussions about it, we had very open discussions about it. We held onto his ankles for 9 years until it became his decision. He was 18. We couldn't be there forever, preventing him taking his life. And so he had to make his own decision. But he told us along the way, he said, it's like, well, how did you even come up with this? Where does this start? And he said, well, for me, it's just the logical thing. We're all going to die. And we're going to have a lot of pain and suffering between when we're born and when we die. So why would I go through that? Why don't I just skip all that? I'm going to die anyway. So why does it matter? Now, he also, as he got older, by the time he took his life, he was fluent in Latin. He could write Latin. He studied Latin. He studied all the great philosophical works. He read the Bible cover to cover more than once. He read all the Greek philosophers. He could almost recite Marcus Aurelius's diaries. And of course, one of the things that I learned or came to realize later was that someone who's in a dark place mentally should not read Nietzsche. Nietzsche is not a great philosopher for when you're. It's not a great philosopher, in my opinion, overall. But if you're going to have that kind of mental debate and philosophical debate, it's much better to have those when you're in a positive mental place, so that you can reason your way through it. So I think Nietzsche played a role, and also Marcus Aurelius's diaries. Being a Stoic. I don't think Marcus Aurelius was talking about taking your own life, but when you're in a dark place, you read into things. And so being a Stoic and facing one's own death and how one perceives life, I think those influenced him. But he had started having ideations long before.
Was he
Before
stoic
he
in
became
general anyway? Was he already stoic?
Yeah, he was a very
not
stoic
emotional
person,
at
very
all.
stoic. The thing was, he could be extremely emotional, but then he would be extremely logical. And I think he struggled between the two in controlling his emotional side. But like I said, he was, our physician told us after, he said, Andy, and he knew Heston. Heston was his name. Heston is his name. And he knew him and said, he had just met with Heston probably 10 days before Heston's death. He met with him on a regular basis, probably every 2 or 3 weeks. He would have him come by the office and they would just chat, just so he could kind of keep an eye on him. This physician's wife is a psychiatrist, and she had met with Heston, and then we had another psychiatrist that he saw. Always good to make sure that your psychiatrists are the right kind of psychiatrist. The first psychiatrist was not very helpful. I think he was not very helpful at all.
I'm damaged.
And yeah, I think so. But my physician's wife was very helpful. But he, my physician said, and he met with him and he knew him, and he said, look, they would debate medicine and all these big things, right? The big topics. Heston was very much into large philosophical discussions. Even though he was a very black and white thinker, there wasn't a lot of gray area. It was either right or wrong. If you were in a gray area, you were just a hypocrite. It was either black or white. There was binary, on or off, right? So, but my physician told me, he said, I worried about Heston the way I worry about all my highly intelligent teenagers. Those are the ones that I worry about losing the most, because they will reason to themselves, for what purpose should I continue to fight this struggle? I'm going to die anyway. And, it's foreign to me, that concept.
Even with
But
all
my
the struggles
wife,
you've had in your life, that is foreign to you, isn't it? That's a statement.
yeah, it is foreign to me. And I would talk to him about that.
It
And
is
he
to
was
me
like,
too. I mean, I talked to a guy
yeah,
once that said that most of his life, every day, he woke up wishing this would be the day that he died, and that was
yeah,
I can't relate to that. I don't relate to that.
no, no, I don't. And I know that it's not really helpful for someone who is, having thoughts of suicide, suicidal ideation. And my wife, actually, she struggled with it after my son's passing, because he had promised her that, he was the youngest one. They had been able to spend time together after he was born, and the other was, they're all close in age, but the others were older. And then he had promised her that even though he had talked about it, he would never do it unless he came first to talk to her, to give her a chance to talk him out of it. If he ever got like he was determined that day, and he didn't. And so that almost broke my wife.
Well,
And so she had suicidal ideations. I actually called her one day when I was very concerned about her. And she told me later, I talked her into going to see our physician. He, pushed patients aside and brought her in. And she told me later that she was seriously thinking that day, Heston had passed away. She had kind of lost, a reason, like that it was just so impactful to her. She didn't want to be here. And she described it as, which I could not understand before, and I don't think she understood before until she had that experience. And I've talked to other folks who have been able to either attempt and they did not complete the act, or they did not follow through on it and later realized that they were glad that they hadn't, and they chose a different path. They chose the path to live. And one guy told me it was like standing on the edge of a cliff looking over into the abyss. It became easy to just fall into the abyss. My wife described it as standing next to a very dark tunnel, and there was no light in the tunnel. And that once you kind of let your foot slip into the tunnel, that the tunnel was very seductive. It kind of talked to you in a way that life would be better. Life will be easier. The pain will go away. Your family will be better off without you. Then they
to me,
won't have to suffer with you.
that's the enemy, and I don't know how. To me, that's the enemy. I mean, I do believe that there's evil forces in the world, and that sounds like the enemy trying to taunt somebody into the dark side.
Well, I think absolutely, 100%. And yeah, but the enemy does it with a very seductive voice, and
Well,
everything
absolutely,
will be
completely
better.
makes sense. Totally rational, comforting.
Everything will be better. Your pain will go
Everything.
away.
Yeah,
Their pain will go away. They've watched you struggle. You have these conflicts, like all that
yeah.
stuff will go away. They will be better off. They'll understand, and they'll be better off without you. But so that's when she said, she realized that all the times we had talked to Heston, that we were not, nothing we said was as seductive as that was. There was nothing to draw back on.
And override that.
And, I realized a lot of things through that process, but
So your wife experienced grief on grief. I mean, she blamed herself, and then she was, the grief of the
well,
son.
so I will tell you, that's the one thing we did. We had put everything into him. We had put everything that we could into helping him and really holding on to him. We've had a lot of discussions about it. We don't have guilt over what we could have done or done differently. Now, those thoughts come in. We deal with those thoughts because you kind of go back through the stages of grief and you think, well, it couldn't have really happened. This is just a
But you're
dream.
able to dismiss those thoughts.
Yeah. And so, but her thing was she was extremely angry at him for doing this.
Mm-hmm.
That was her
Mm-hmm.
son. He was the mother. They
Mm-hmm.
had an extremely tight relationship. They understood each other's jokes and humor, and they understood each other before some things were even said. And he had made a promise. He had made a promise to her, and he violated that promise. He broke that promise, and that was just devastating to her. And so to this day, if it comes up, she will tell you straight up that she is still extremely angry with him about it. And I'll say, well, look, I've forgiven him for it. He wasn't in a good place mentally. I think it was spur of the moment. And I think if he had it to do over again, he wouldn't choose that path. But he did. And she's like, yeah, I understand all that. And I'm still super pissed off at him. Like, if I could get my hands on him, I would teach him a motherly lesson, like I would do it. So I think it affects it. That's one thing that I would say to people who may be dealing with suicidal ideations, or that tunnel that darkness is kind of speaking to you. If if you can take this in, I would say to anyone in that situation, the pain will not go with you. I don't care what that darkness is saying. I don't care what the thoughts are in your mind. The pain will not go with you. You will leave and the pain will stay. And that pain will metastasize like a cancer. It will infect everyone who loves you. It will affect everyone who knows you. And
Ripple effect.
it will infect
Negative
people.
ripple.
It will infect people that you don't know and that you would never have known, but they will hear that story and that pain will transfer to them, and it will transfer generationally. So no, you're not making things better. No, the pain will not go with you. No, everyone here is not better off without you. You are valuable. You were created to be of purpose. You are a thread in the fabric of the universe. And without you, there will be a hole. The universe will be torn because it's not your time. And I would just, say, don't do it. Find a way to stay here and confront the pain, work to lessen the pain, maybe even eventually remove the pain. And then by staying, what you will pass on to everyone else, what you will pass on to those who love you, those who know you, and those who don't know you, and to future generations is persistence. You will have passed forward overcoming the darkness. And so the only thing that happens if you give into that darkness is you won't be here, but all the things that are making you feel that that's the right answer, all those bad things will stay, and they will stay for generations. So I don't know if that concept makes sense to me, but I'm not in that situation. I would just hope that maybe one person who's listening, who might be thinking that that is the way, would come to the realization that it is in fact not the way.
Yeah, I agree. Wonderful. I mean, it's a great message. So one of our unalienable rights is the pursuit of happiness.
Mm.
Andy, I want to hear about something. We've talked about a couple heavy things here.
Yeah.
Have you experienced happiness, genuine happiness in your life?
I have. Actually, I
Tell me
have.
about it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. It's a great question. And I know people say that, but I genuinely mean it's a great question, because one of the things when I was going through some type of therapy was, and it might have been when I was going through EMDR, I can't remember exactly, but the therapist, my wife was with me, and the therapist asked us to recall a happy memory from childhood. And my wife was like, my father just cut the grass. I was on a big wheel and I could smell the fresh cut grass. The sun was shining and I was riding my big wheel and I could smell the fresh cut
That
grass.
makes me happy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah. And I sat there and it seemed like an eternity. Maybe it was 2 or 3 minutes. The therapist's like, there's got to be one. And I could not think of a single happy memory, a single happy one. Now, as I progressed through facing these things and working to kind of rewire how I thought about them, some of that fog lifted and I was able to remember some really happy moments from my childhood. And I have gotten to a place now where even though I think about my son every day, maybe multiple times a day, there's always something. There's a car that passes by that looks like his car. There's a young man that has a similar haircut or a similar stature, and I see him from the back, or there's always something. And if that doesn't happen, then it's just a memory pops back up. But I have, and I think my wife would say the same thing. My children would now say that because we have faced it and we've worked really diligently. I put a ton of focus on my wife and children to not get stuck, to not stay in that place of grief, that we could grieve without staying in grief. We could claw our way forward. And so I have happy moments during the day. Almost every day there's something that I can be happy about. I love watching my dogs play. Like I watch my dogs, and especially when they're in a place where they can really run free, they just love. They're super happy, and they're being happy. Like I just feed off of that. I can think back to being with my grandfather on a row crop farm and riding the tractor, or driving the tractor, and plowing a field, or just being with him in a truck in the warm sunshine in the late spring through the fall, and just the way the air felt in the fall. So I can be happy now. It was work to get there. It was not something that just happened. It took a lot of focus. And I would say this: I've had a lot of great ancestors. They had a lot of bad behaviors, but I had a lot of very tenacious, gritty people that I could look back on. None more so than my own mother, who, through her battle with cancer, her struggle against cancer, in those 11 years of what amounted to 11 years of dying, she taught me how to live. And she set an example, which I think it goes back to the suicide thing. Like my mother set an example that has impacted my perspective on surviving, and surviving long enough to do better. And sometimes you're just surviving, but the goal is to do better, feel better, be in a better place. And so her legacy across the generations is persistence, right? It's perseverance. Even though ultimately she succumbed to it, we all succumb to death. The number one cause of death
Is death.
in the entire human history since the beginning of mankind is birth. And
Yeah,
so
there
we're
you
all
go.
going to die, right?
Well,
It's not
my
it's not a
dad used to say,
disease, it's actually birth.
ain't nobody getting out of this thing alive. I mean, that's
No,
that's the
no.
fact.
So what she taught me though was how to live. She taught me how to live
Boy,
for as long as I
the word
did
that's
live.
popping into my head right now is dignity. Did she teach you
Yes.
dignity?
Yeah, I think she did. I think she did teach. I mean, she always strived to be a dignified person, to live with dignity. And I think, she didn't whine a lot. I mean, I'm sure she cried behind closed doors, and she really struggled, mentally and physically. She had to go through a lot back in the late 70s and early 80s. You can imagine mid 80s. It would be what we would think of as barbaric today, right? I mean, the surgeries and everything that she went through. But through that, I learned perseverance. I learned courage, determination, perseverance, and
Resilient.
yeah, resilience, right? And I think that's what she passed to me, and that's what I think I've passed on to my children, and then their children eventually. And I think that's like the antithesis of that is suicide, because yes, it was painful when my mother died, but the counterweight to that pain was what she left by showing us how to live. And
And the two
with my
differences, well, maybe the two differences is I had both of my parents died way before their time with 1 in 1 million, 1 in 10 million illnesses, right?
yeah.
But I had the opportunity to talk to them because I've talked about this before in this podcast, but when someone dies, it's like burning a library.
Hmm.
So you had the opportunity to talk. My guess is there wasn't anything that went unsaid between you and your mother because you had the opportunity to ask her things and so forth. With your son, while you knew that he was susceptible to the way he ended up, it was probably different, perhaps.
Vastly different.
I mean,
Vastly different.
right now you could probably come up with 1,000 questions you want to ask him, and so it's those two losses were different, but the one that as you said before, I think is astounding is what you said, that by taking his own life, the ripple effect was very negative. The way your mother died with dignity and perseverance and all these things, the outcome, the ripple effect was positive. And so I think that's another really important message that you've just taught us. I think that's great.
You're going to pass something forward. That's going to happen.
Hmm.
Now it's only a matter of what. Just like we're all going to die. And now it's just a matter of timing, right? It's just a matter of timing. And between now and whatever that time is, what are you going to do with it? And I think one of the things that we should strive to do is to pass forward those characteristics that will help the next generation continue on and persevere, and, ultimately pass on to the next generation the ability to persevere and overcome and do those things. That's my personal belief. But I am convinced, I think I've observed it, I believe it to be true, that we will pass forward something and we get to choose. And my son, not realizing that, what he passed forward, that we will now spend a lot of time, have spent, will continue to spend a lot of time working to prevent going any further, which we won't be 100% successful. It may take 2 or 3 generations to clean this up. But what he passed forward was the pain that he felt. And so we have to deal with that. So those around you, the universe itself will have, God, in my opinion, God created the universe to function a certain way, and it does function a certain way. And we will pass something forward. That's it. So we should really, it's one of the reasons why we should confront our troubles, why we should confront our troubles and not give in to, or fight to the last breath, to fight to the last breath. And it's because we will pass something forward. I read one of my last therapists, the one who did the EMDR, she said, Andy, what is the meaning of your life? What's the meaning in your life? How do you keep going? And I didn't really understand the question. I said, well, to do this for these people and do that for those people. And she said, no, what's your meaning in life? What is your meaning in life? And I thought about that, and I didn't really have an answer. And so she handed me a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And I read that book. It's very short. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It is the antithesis to Nietzsche. It is the literal antithesis. As Dostoevsky is the antithesis to Nietzsche in life, then Frankl is in philosophy, just direct philosophy as a psychiatrist. He is just the exact opposite. Frankl says, so Frankl went to the concentration camps, and his wife, who was pregnant at the time, and his mother were taken to a different camp. And so he never saw her again, but he knew that she was pregnant. What you learn through so the first half of the book is all about the experiences in the camps. Very depressing, very, very depressing, because he's very, literal and graphic in his description of the camps. His point, though, which he makes in the second half of the book, is that I think the number that he used was like 1 in 28 that went into the camp would make it out alive. 1 in 28. That there was a percentage. He was a psychiatrist before he went in. He had actually was writing a book and had a manuscript, and the guards took it from him and burned it, and all kind of, he goes through that. And so he thought that his meaning in life was to write this book. But his meaning in life was, I think, what he held on to was he wanted to see his wife and child. That's what he held on to, that he would do what he had to do to stay alive so that he could see his wife and child, not knowing. He only found out after he got out of the camps that they had died very early on in the process. But Frankl says that a large number of people that he saw in the camps, men in the camps, either died from hope. They hoped something would happen, but they didn't have meaning in their life. They didn't have a rock to hang on to, but they just had hope. They hoped the things would be better. They hoped the guards wouldn't treat them as badly. They hoped that the Allies would show up and free them. And then at each thing, when each time passed, they became less and less hopeful, and they eventually became sick and died sooner than others.
Because they lost all hope.
They had counted on hope for their resiliency.
They stopped counting on it.
When the moment passed that the hope became futile, then their life became futile. And so he was searching. He was saying we have to search for something. Hope is useful, but to sustain yourself through these things, you have to have something deeper to hold on to.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about that on this podcast too. Hope is an interesting word. I said throughout my career, hope is not a strategy.
Right.
And that's what you're basically saying. However, it is hope is necessary because it keeps people going.
Faith, hope, and love.
It's a very mysterious concept, hope.
Yeah. I think I understand what he's saying. So I'll take it to my personal religious beliefs, and I'm not proselytizing or going down that path. But in my personal religious beliefs, I have hope for a better world. I have hope for a return of the Messiah. I have a hope for these things. And I have the meaning in my life.
I apologize for interrupting, but I'm not Catholic. I went to a Catholic high school. I'm not Catholic. I don't know if you're Catholic or not. I don't know what you're.
No, I'm not.
But today is a historic day. We a new pope was elected, and
Yes.
I experienced hope. I experienced joy, and isn't that something? It's a poignant moment. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, but
It,
I
it, it,
throw that in
no,
there.
no, no. So I think hope in that sense, but what happens if your hopes don't come true? I think then there is a belief system that has to kick in that says, in spite of my hope, look, many sects of Christianity have believed at different times that the Christ would return at a given moment, and their hopes were dashed. So I can hope for something and still then have a belief in a purpose. And I think that's what Frankel was trying to
Called
communicate.
faith.
Not right, not in the same way, but with the same analogy. But so he said there was this large group of people that he observed that died either through suicide or through lost hope. They became hopeless. And then he said, then there was this smaller group that had meaning. They had that faith. They had that rock to hold on to, not the faith that they would get out, but the faith that their life meant something. They believed that their life meant something. And many of those went to the gas chambers and they died, but they died with dignity. They died with meaning. And he makes this point. He says, we're all going to die. So now I'm paraphrasing. Okay, if you read the book, it won't say this, but I'm paraphrasing. We're all going to die. Calling is to die with dignity, is to die with meaning. And
Wow.
he said, then there's the 1 in 28 that would get out, that would make it out alive. And he said, most people with meaning died in the camps, but no one without meaning was the 1 in 28 that made it out. You had to have meaning to be one of the 28 that made it out alive, even though 1 in 27 were going to die. If you wanted a shot at being the 1 in 28, you must have meaning to sustain you. And I think that really struck home with me. So I think inadvertently, if you say, how have I survived some of these things, or so far all of them, I think it is because inadvertently I was raised with meaning. I have something that I hold on to, and I believe that ultimately my life has purpose, as I believe every human being's life has purpose, and I believe that every
The
human
Imago
being
Dei, right?
is loved.
We are all created in God's image, and so we all have
Yeah.
something to pass along.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think meaning in life, a belief that your life means something and that you have meaning in life. And if you're struggling with that, if you're listening and you're struggling with that, I highly recommend Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's a very short book, and I think he does a fantastic job of getting to the point quickly, giving examples, and then showing how he later created, I think, what became like the third way of psychiatry or the fourth way of psychiatry, which was based around this notion of the way to better mental health is to have meaning in your life.
Well, now so listeners know, Andy has come up with core beliefs, and I'm going to read through them, and we could spend an hour on every one of these, but we're not going to do that. What I'd like to do, Andy, is I'm going to read these. I want to pick one out that I want to discuss,
Mm-hmm.
and I want you to pick out one that you would like to discuss to maybe wrap
Fair
up
enough.
the conversation. So Andy came up with some core beliefs. No one outruns the universe. There are no hard decisions, only hard consequences. Always fall forward. Have an insatiable curiosity. Compete only with yourself. Thinking versus knowing. Every challenge has a chewy nugget center made of opportunity. Never be waiting. Never try, always work. The 38th special rule, hold on loosely, but don't let go. Be religious only about religion. Equations are constant. Variables are constantly changing. History doesn't repeat itself. Humans repeat history. The necessity of perseverance and finishing. Man, we talk about a lot of these things on this podcast. I mean, we're wired alike, I think. And so, um, it's fantastic. I mean, I seriously, I could do probably a series of podcast episodes with you on every one of these. I love every single one of these. I'm going to choose thinking versus knowing. And the reason for
Mhm.
that is in recent years, I've talked about how people say, I ask people, do you feel, do you think, do you know, or do you believe? And I don't know where I came up with it. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that a lot of younger people, younger than me, everybody's younger than me, say things like, I feel this, or I feel like I feel I need to tie my
Yeah.
shoes. Like, I don't understand. What are you talking
Yeah.
about? So, thinking versus knowing, distinguish between assumptions and knowledge. How'd you come up with thinking versus knowing, and what do you mean by that as one of your core beliefs? And how can you apply that in your pursuit of happiness, Andy?
Yeah. So that's a good one, actually. I wrote that one down as a lesson I learned actually in sales. As That was the first place I kind of formulated it, and it really came from uh, I work in the technology sector. When I was in sales, when I first got into this 30 something years ago, I first got into technology sales, and I had a sales manager. And he eventually realized that he didn't really need to manage me that much because my wife was my sales manager. I had two small children at the time. They were 2 years apart, and we made a decision because both of our parents had worked and were not home very much. We decided when we had children, she would stay home and raise them, and I would provide the income. And but one thing she was a really good sales manager. She wanted to know where that next deal was coming from, when it was going to book, and when she could expect the commission to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so she didn't really want to know what I thought about something. She wanted to know what I knew about it. And, so we'd have, and I was like, in the beginning, I'd say, well, I think, they're going to meet about the proposal. Well, why don't you know? Why don't you know they're going to meet about the proposal? And, well, I think they're working on, why don't you know they're working on the purchase order? And why don't you know the process for the purchase order coming out? And it's kind of funny now looking back on it, but it was kind of tough back then because I didn't have a lot of answers, like I hadn't really looked at things that way. But I knew that every day I was going to go home, and every day she was going to want to know what I did that day and what did I know was going to happen. She needed that commission to show up.
Huh?
So I always had all of my sales managers after my wife. I always thought I knew my business really well. And they were like, wow, you just really know your business so well. And you know when deals are going to show up, and you know where they're at in the process, and you know all these things. And I said, well, I had a really good sales
And
manager. I had a really good sales
they use
manager.
the word no. I mean,
And they say,
oh
you just
my.
know these things. Yeah. And so and then I started thinking, well, it's not just, I would find other places where I realized I was making assumptions. And, I get what Donald Rumsfeld was saying when he said, there's the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown knowns, the unknown unknowns. Like I get the four quadrants, right? And so you're always going to make decisions where you don't have full information. That's not possible. Even if you thought you had all the information, you wouldn't have all the information. But I came to be very cognizant of, or where I work to become cognizant of, what I don't know that I could know. And so those things that I don't know that I could work to find the answers to, that became a focus for me. And how it helped me, with finding some happiness in life is I realized that I had made a lot of assumptions about life and that I didn't really know for certain if I had been happy. I had assumed I was happy. So what if I'm not happy? Now what would you do? I used the same approach to cancer treatment, where you assume this about cancer. Do you really know how it functions? Do you know what the two things are? What I came to learn later was the two things that a cancer cell will do. It will consume energy and it will replicate. It's not per se your enemy. It doesn't actually know that it's killing its host. It's just doing its defective. It's doing what it thinks is the right thing to do to save its life. And so, are you making assumptions about it, or do you know how or what your plan is? Do you know what you're doing? And so now if you look on the website, I think I've got a list of everything that I take, I still take. including the cancer drug that I'm on in the trial. I think I take probably 45, maybe 40 different supplements on label and off label medications every day. And almost all of those are geared to give my body, well, they're geared to do two things. One, give me the energy to sustain myself. Give me energy, because the cancer drug, the way it works, it has a high rate of people who stop taking it because of fatigue. I've not had to do that. And I got through all the chemotherapy treatments and the immunotherapy treatments and all the side effects from all of those. So I know that the things that I take are geared toward energy. And the other group, if I put everything in two big groups, is around weakening cancer cells. Might not directly, each one in and of itself might only weaken a cancer cell 1%. But if I can weaken those cancer cells, those defective cells, before they become a tumor, if I can weaken them so that the standard of care therapies, and like the drug I'm on now, or just my own immune system, can kill those cells easier, then that's my goal. My goal is to have enough energy to persist and to weaken the cancer cells so that they are easier to kill. I don't want them to be at full strength. I want them to be at 50% strength. And so I applied that rule, and I apply that rule almost every day. And when I had sales team that reported to me, that's what I wanted to know. If someone was giving me an update on a opportunity, and at any point they said, well, I think, we would stop the conversation.
Well, I'm
Make a note of
surprised
what I
people don't
think.
say I feel now. I mean, like, I
Yeah,
feel,
well, I mean,
feel like I
it
want to hit this
does.
goal. I mean, like, what?
Yeah,
No.
yeah. And look, sometimes it's different generations have different ways of saying things, but I think words matter.
Yes, they do.
And I think we hear them. Not only do we speak them, but they go back through our own ears, and so we process them twice. Our own words we process twice. Everyone else's words we process once when we hear them. So I think it's really important to be honest with oneself, to be transparent with oneself, and kind of determine, is what you are thinking, do you know it to be true, or do you assume it is true, or do you think it's true, or do you know it's true? And like I said, there'll be times where you're like, I think this is true, and there's no way for me to validate it. Kind of like having an argument with my wife. Okay, I think I know what I did, but I don't really know for certain, right? And so I have to kind of approach the situation with limited information. But then there are times when I know exactly what I did, right? And I don't have to make an assumption. And if I'm making an assumption and it's something that I could know, I could put the effort into knowing, then I should do that. And if I make a decision and it turns out poorly, and I didn't take the opportunity to know something that I thought I knew, then that's on me. I own that one. And if I own it, I'm probably less likely to make that error again. My grandfather had a saying that experience is what you get just after you needed it. And so you shouldn't have to get experience twice.
I love it.
So that's kind of how I apply
Oh, your grandfather's a
thinking
cowboy.
versus knowing.
I already know that. He
Yeah.
wasn't an egghead. I love it. That's
No,
fantastic.
he was a man with hands. He was
He did
a
things.
very
He
strong
executed it.
individual.
Yeah. All right. So let's have you pick one of your core beliefs, and we'll just close out with kind of a final message here that you want to leave my listeners.
Yeah, I will choose equations are constant, variables are constantly changing. And the reason I would choose that one is we've talked about resiliency. We talked about, staying the course, not giving up. And I think when I was in college, I majored in my bachelor's in finance. And I liked finance because it was, unlike economics, it wasn't as philosophical. Finance was, there's an equation. The equation has been proven to work, and that equation works every single time. You want to know the net present value of a dollar. You want to know the internal rate of return. There are formulas for that, and those formulas always work. What changes is the variable in the equation. The variables change, and that changes the summation of the equation. And along the way, I wrote that down. Always remember that the equation is constant, but the variables will change. And you say, well, what can cause the variables to change? Well, it could be an infinite number of things. It could be I decide to change a variable. In the net present value of an investment, I may decide that the rate of return is 4%, or the cost of capital is 3% versus 4%. I can change those variables. I can decide. Maybe the market decides. Maybe other people decide. But what I know for certain is that summation will not stay constant. The summation of the equation will not stay constant. So if you're in a situation today where your life, you're looking at it and you think that the summation of your life has been calculated and is finished, like that calculation, that it will be the summation. I will be a failure. I will not reach my goals. This is the outcome of my life. I would say to you that is not how the universe works. The equation is constant. The summation of your life, that equation, it is the way that it was designed to operate. But the equation was also designed in that the variables will change. Time will change the variables, if nothing else. And so if you give your situation time, I think we would all be very surprised at how much the summation of that equation will change. So the way I apply that is, you can be down today. You might even be depressed for a period of time. When my son passed, I'm still sad. In the beginning, I was sad every moment of every second of every minute of every hour of every day.
Grief, yes.
Yeah. But if you give it time, while time does not heal all wounds, I don't believe that. And that's a nice thing to say. I don't believe that's true. In my case, it's not true. Time will not heal that wound, but that wound can become a smaller percentage of the totality of my life.
Right.
And so that variable can become it can become a less weighted variable in the equation. So
it goes from a wound to a scar.
Yeah. Or look, I saw a thing one time. I think we all have to process these things in the most positive way possible. I saw a thing one time, I'm kind of a visual person, so I see colors and pictures, not words. And it showed a graph of, of someone who had passed away, but it was like a big hole on the paper, and it consumed the whole page, just consumed the whole page with a big hole. And then the next picture was life a few years down the road, and the hole was the same size, but the paper had gotten bigger. And so now it was filled with all these other things of life. So the hole was still there, but as a percentage of life, it had become a smaller percentage of the total picture. And I held on to that, and I've held on to it. I held on to it when my mother passed away. I held on to it, when my father and I, got to the point where we could no longer spend time together or talk. And I used that when my son passed away. We have to realize that no matter how bad it is right now, no matter how much it hurts or how difficult it is, if you allow for time, that thing will become a smaller percentage of your life. It will still be the same size it was, but it will become a smaller percentage. And that means that then you have opportunity for better things.
Other things.
Right? You have some opportunity for happiness, some joy, some new adventures, some great things, maybe some other difficulties. I had pancreatic cancer and then lost my son. But in between, I've actually had a lot of good things that have happened. And my life has expanded. So equations are constant, variables are constantly changing, reminds me that today is not the summation of your life. Tomorrow, the sun will rise and you have an opportunity to influence some of those variables. Time will influence some of those variables. Other people, you also have to give a chance for other people to come into your life and affect those variables. And so, give God a chance to move the universe in your favor. That's kind of what that one says. Give God a chance to move the universe into your favor.
Great closing message. Very positive. I really appreciate your time, Andy. I'm going to let listeners know that if they want to get a hold of Andy or buy his book or get more information, it's askandycampbell.com.
Yep.
So I
did that because people wanted to know why I was still alive, and they said they would ask me. And so I said, well, I'll just create a site that says Ask Andy Campbell, and I'll put some information out there. So that's how that started.
Well, we are wishing you the very best, and big guy knows all, and we hope you're around for many years. This has been
I appreciate that.
Conversation.
Thank you for your time today. I really do. I appreciate the opportunity.
You bet.